Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to episode 32 of It's Murder Up North. I wish to take a moment to thank Julie for becoming the show's latest Patreon supporter. Thank you so much for signing up and supporting the show. If you want to join Patreon, please visit Patreon/It's Murder Up North. And don't forget you can keep up to date with the show by following on Twitter or joining the Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, I would love for you to shout about it by leaving a 5-star review wherever you listen, and that will let other people know how great the show is. It will also put a smile on your host's face. My podcast of the week is The True Crime Files, who focus on highlighting lesser-known cases that need to be told. Here is a sneak peek.
Hi, I'm Christine, and I'd like to introduce you to the True Crime Files podcast, a bi-weekly podcast that focuses on mysterious disappearances and unsolved murders. Every 2 weeks, we'll be releasing an episode that'll help you get to know a case really well without having to invest a lot of your time. Derived from the articles up on the True Crime Files website, you'll find that our show covers a diversity of victims and perspectives. You'll probably also notice that our episodes are narrated by Scott Fuller from the Frozen Truth and Status Pending podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to the True Crime Files today so that you never miss an episode. Thanks so much for listening, being a part of our true crime community, and helping to shine a light on cases that might otherwise be overlooked or underreported.
Now, let's head to the episode. Hessel sits on the outskirts of Hull, in the shadow of the Humber Bridge, and was where Keith Slater, whose story I covered in episode 7, was murdered on his doorstep in 1988. Today's case occurred nearly 100 years before Keith's death, long before the imposing structures of the Humber Bridge was constructed, when Hessel was a fast-growing town, home to a number of large chalk quarries, one of which would later become Humber Bridge Country Park, which has an area known as Little Switzerland, where Keith Slater spent his last day alive with his family. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the city of Hull. Sitting on the shores of the River Humber, it was ideally situated for trade with Europe. On the website The Yorkshire Historian, they describe Hull in the 19th century as, quote, a city with multiple industries, which meant it did not suffer from the catastrophic changes of fortune suffered by single-industry towns of Lancashire. Trades such as corn milling and fishing complemented its port. Hull is a relatively strange example of a town during the Industrial Revolution, where most factories employed women and children for fiddly jobs. Hull offered much less employment to these workforces. Instead, it offered a more variable supply of work for men than manufacturing districts such as Leeds. As a major port, the industries grew rapidly and so did the city. Its expansion took over the open fields of villages like Hessel, which soon became an integral part of the city's fortunes. Running parallel with the River Humber is Hessel Road, now a forgotten thoroughfare. It was once a major road heading into the city of Hull, which by the late 1800s was lined by shops and inns, and branching off Hessel Road, new houses began to emerge. Rows of terraces were built to house workers for the newly constructed St Andrew's Dock, where merchant sailors and the fishing fleet operated. Steam trains brought freight back and forth from the quayside, and large coal-fired vessels crowded the River Humber. Yet despite the city becoming richer, the people who lived in the terraces that branched out from the docks were poverty-stricken. Men worked long hours for low pay, and as was often the case, birth rates were very high. with the large families dwelling in cramped conditions. A description of the slum-like conditions can be found in a report by Early Morning News, which stated, quote, "Many streets were overflowing with sewage. The houses were small, filthy and squalid, with the only furniture in many being boxes and straw. In a number of cases, animals, horses, pigs and sheep shared the houses with the human occupants. A huge number of pawnbrokers sprang up along the full length of Hessel Road and in numerous side streets." The worst conditions were, however, slowly improving through to the 1890s, but life was extremely difficult for most. End quote. It was into these conditions that William Burkitt was born in 1887. William was the eldest of 9 children born to William and Mary, and he had a younger brother called Harold and a sister called Maria. Not much else is known of his childhood. In later reports, his mother is referred to as being a woman of good character, and it is possible that his father would have worked on the docks or at the quarries, as these were the main employers in the area. Life must have been tough for the Burkitt family, and when William's father passed away, it would have fallen on the teenager as the eldest son to seek work in order to help support his family. William began working as a stoker on the fishing trawlers and discovered he had a love for the sea. He was by all accounts a hard worker, who seemed to be more at home on the ocean than he was on land. Working aboard the coal-fired fishing trawlers was tough, dangerous work which often involved being at sea for weeks at a time. Scouring the sea for their haul, the men on board were at the mercy of the vicious storms that battered the ships. They were hard-working and dedicated men, but they did not always get paid for their efforts. Sometimes they would return to port to find there was no demand for their catch. Between his time at sea, William fathered a child in 1913 and was subsequently taken to court to force him to pay for his illegitimate offspring. The court found in the mother's favour and William was ordered to pay maintenance. He, however, returned to court charged with failing to provide for his child. Apart from these court appearances, William lived a law-abiding life. But in 1914, his life, like thousands of others, was transformed by the outbreak of the First World War. As part of the war effort, many of the fishing trawlers, with their strong hulls and sturdy crew, were commandeered to conduct minesweeping operations in the North Sea, and William signed up for naval service. The fishermen were thrust into the dangerous battlegrounds under constant threat from German mines and U-boats. Accounts from those who undertook these treacherous tasks spoke not only of the danger, but of those who lost their lives. Some recalled being in the pub the night before with the crew of another vessel, and the following day that vessel and her crew would be lost to the sea. They respected the power of the sea, but this was a new experience, losing friends and family not to the ocean, but to war. And perhaps that was why 28-year-old William did not take to naval life. He was reprimanded on one occasion for causing a disturbance, and was later labelled a deserter after fleeing from his duties. Something changed in William following his experiences in the Navy. He began drinking heavily, and this led him down a dark path. Upon returning from the war, William began working on a fishing vessel based in Scarborough. When he came back to Hull, he resided at the home of Mary Ann Tyler, a married mother of 2, whose husband had recently returned wounded from the war. Her relationship with her husband was complex. They had been separated for a number of years, however they still lived together. This was common in the early 20th century, as divorce was rare, considered to be scandalous, and the requirements to secure a divorce included proof of adultery or violence, and, more importantly, money, which meant that it was a luxury afforded only to the very rich. Mary had a lodger called Mr. Harding, whom is referred to in some reports as her lover. Mr. Harding worked on the fishing boats, and when he was away at sea, William would lodge in Harding's space. 10 days after William had returned to Hessel, an argument erupted when Mary, who was known to be a jealous individual, found a photograph of William and another woman. She flew into a rage, demanding to know who the woman was. During the argument, she tore the photo and struck William with her hand. Her language became increasingly abusive as the argument escalated, culminating in William threatening Mary, but not retaliating to her violent outburst. She demanded he leave the property, which he refused to do as she had already taken his money. With William refusing to leave, Mary fled from the house and stayed with her friend Elizabeth, to whom she had described what had occurred between her and William. The following day, Elizabeth and her daughter went with Mary back to her home, before the trio were accompanied by William to the chemist, where Mary wished to buy an ointment for her complexion, as William had commented on her spots and she wished to treat them. During the trip, the pair seemed cordial, but Elizabeth later told the court that the remnants of the argument still lingered. That night, however, Mary and William attended the picture house together and seemed to be back on friendly terms. 2 days after the argument had occurred, at 9:15 on the evening of Saturday the 28th of August, an intoxicated William stumbled through the door of his mother's house and announced with slurred words, quote, "I have done it." When his mother inquired what he meant, William replied, "I have done Polly in." Polly was the name by which Mary was commonly known. He continued, quote, "She won't tantalise anyone else." His mother grabbed her coat and her son's hand, and the pair marched to Mary's house. William unlocked the door and they stepped into the darkened interior. Drunkenly, William scrambled to turn on the gaslight. And when he did, the flame illuminated the small living room and reflected in a pool of blood that accumulated under the motionless figure of Mary. William's mother turned and fled from the house. Her son followed her, but paused momentarily to lock the door, before running to catch his mother up. As he did so, he spotted Mary's daughter Flora and her son George. He stopped them, handing them the key to the house, and told them to find a constable because their mother was dead, before calmly walking away. Returning back to his mother's house, he was met by his brother Harold, to whom he showed the knife that had killed Mary. The blade was bent and blood-stained, as were the cuffs of William's shirt. Agitated, William left the house, closely pursued by Harold. But when a scream pierced the air, Harold abandoned his brother and proceeded towards where the cry had come from. It had been the anguished cry of Flora, who had entered her home with a police officer and had discovered her mother's lifeless body. William was apprehended at 1 a.m. the following morning, stumbling drunkenly down towards the docks. He was escorted to the police station, and during the journey he stated, "She had brought me down to this." Post-mortem revealed that Mary had been stabbed 4 times in the neck, which had severed her jugular vein, causing the mother of 2 to bleed out. When William appeared in court charged with Mary Tyler's murder, one of the witnesses called to testify was Elizabeth, who advised the court that Mary had a fiery temperament, and when she arrived at Elizabeth's home following the argument, Mary openly admitted that she had started the disagreement, and that it was her who had physically assaulted William. Elizabeth recalled that she had visited Mary at her home on the day of the murder, and stated that the pair seemed to be on good terms. However, William was in a drunken state. The arresting officer, P.C. Marshall, stated that he had been led to the Tyler house by Mary's young daughter when he discovered the deceased partially covered by a black coat. The officer explained that when he apprehended William, he was intoxicated and kept inquiring about Mary's wedding ring, which she had supposedly thrown at him during the argument. This ring was found close to where Mary's body was discovered. Dr. Mason testified regarding the injuries which the deceased had sustained. The court was shown the murder weapon, a knife used in the filleting of fish. The doctor highlighted that Mary had been stabbed 4 times, the 2 most significant blows being to the right shoulder, which he concluded is how the knife was bent. The other wound was above the right collarbone and had severed the jugular vein, causing Mary's death. The doctor concluded that he believed the attack on Mary Tyler was quick, and that she was taken by surprise as there was a lack of defensive wounds. During closing arguments, Mr. Rowan Hamilton for the defence addressed the jury. He described Mary as being unfaithful to many men, and that William Burkitt was probably the only man who truly loved her. He continued to explain how William had been provoked into attacking Mary, who had continued to argue with him despite his pleas for her to stop. She had driven him into a sudden fit of aggression, which resulted in him taking her life. He concluded that William does not deny killing Mary, but he should be charged with manslaughter due to being provoked. Before sending the jury to deliberate, Judge Justice Atkin highlighted the circumstances of the case. He advised the jury of Mary's temper and that William was intoxicated at the time, but he reminded them that although this should go in the defendant's favour, it should not excuse his actions, stating, quote, "If nagging by wives was a justification to reduce the charge from murder to manslaughter, it would be a very dangerous thing, and it is not the law." The jury returned after deliberating for just 1 hour, and found the defendant guilty of manslaughter. Upon passing sentence, the judge reminded William that he was fortunate as there was a high possibility he could have been found guilty of murder. And he remarked that no matter how much Mary Tyler had provoked him, she did not deserve to die for it. William was sentenced to serve 12 years in prison, but having been incarcerated for 9 years, William Burkitt was released on the 16th of November 1924, and he returned to his hometown of Hessel, and went back to work on the fishing trawlers. In October 1925, William Burkitt, having landed from a couple of months at sea, took up residence with 44-year-old Ellen Spencer. A woman he had known for a number of years, Ellen, like Mary, had been separated from her husband, Samuel, for 14 years. She had a reputation as a petty thief, and had the unfortunate honour of being the first woman in Hull to be caught by an anti-shoplifting alarm when she attempted to steal from the boys' department store on Hessel Road. Like many in the early 20th century, Ellen made money by having lodgers stay in her home for a small fee. These tended to be trawlermen who, due to the nature of their work and the low pay they received, did not have permanent accommodation. It was at her home on Leslie Street that Burkitt was residing at the beginning of November 1925, when Ellen's daughter Matilda came to visit her. Matilda knocked repeatedly on the door, but received no answer. Stepping back off the doorstep, Matilda observed that all the blinds and windows were closed. Swiftly she made her way to the rear of the property. Down the narrow alleyway, she found the gate bolted, and so climbed over the wall and dropped down into the flagstone yard. Just like the front, the door was locked, the windows sealed, and the blinds pulled down. Concerned, Matilda called out to Ellen's neighbour, George, who was able to force the door open, allowing access to the property. Passing through the kitchen, nothing appeared untoward, until the pair entered the living room, where upon the sofa lay Ellen. Covered by 2 coats, in the dim light she appeared to be sleeping. But when Matilda knelt down to wake her mother, she noticed the blood on her mother's arms. Matilda called to her mum to rouse her, but it was too late. Ellen Spencer was deceased. Leaving her mother's home, Matilda soon returned with P.C. Dowthwaite, who conducted a search of the property. It was as the officer climbed the narrow enclosed staircase that he became aware of a foul scent that he recognised instantly. Hurrying his ascent, P.C. Dowthwaite entered the front bedroom. The air was thick with the smell of coal gas. He raced to the window, flung open the blind, and opened the sash to allow air to dissipate the noxious gas. With daylight filling the room, P.C. Dowthwaite was able to turn off the gas supply. Before turning his attention to the unconscious man on the bed, he began chest compressions until a doctor arrived. Searching the man's pockets, they were able to establish the identity of the individual. He was William Burkitt, who, having been diagnosed with coal gas poisoning, was taken to the infirmary via ambulance. On the way, he confessed to PC Dowthwaite, quote, "I stabbed her on Monday on the couch with the pocket knife. I stabbed the woman on the couch. I was jealous of another man." The length of time and the amount of gas someone is exposed to can greatly change the symptoms that individuals suffer, from a mild headache to confusion, unconsciousness, and ultimately death. These can start anywhere from 5 minutes up to 8 hours, depending on the exposure. Upon reaching the infirmary, William was checked by the doctor before being formally cautioned by PC Dowthwaite. He asked William to confirm whether he stood by his earlier confession, to which the suspect confirmed it was true, adding that, quote, "The knife is in the kitchen drawer." While William recuperated in hospital, the investigation into Ellen Spencer's death was carried out. Speaking to neighbours and friends of the deceased, it was established that Ellen was on friendly terms with the man who had just confessed to killing her. People who saw Ellen on the day of the murder stated that the 44-year-old seemed in good spirits and did not appear to be worried or afraid. Her neighbours told police during their door-to-door inquiries that they had not heard anything unusual that November night, and a search of the house appeared to confirm that there seemed to have been no struggle or violent disagreement. The search did uncover a hammer, which appeared to have blood on it. However, this was not consistent with Ellen's injuries and was eliminated as the murder weapon. William acknowledged he owned the pair of bloodstained boots that were found in the kitchen, and a pair of trousers which appeared as though someone had attempted to wash out the bloodstains. The murder weapon, a small pocket knife, was found to be in the kitchen drawer, just as William had stated. It appeared to have been wiped clean. However, traces of blood remained between the handle and the blade. A post-mortem found that Ellen Spencer was, quote, "a healthy, well-nourished woman," whose death was caused after being stabbed in the neck twice. One of these blows had punctured the jugular vein. When the case went to trial, William Burkitt's issue with alcohol was presented to the jury. He was described as a hard-working man at sea, but when on land, he was addicted to drink. His defence, Mr. Burnens, argued that Burkitt killed Ellen while under the influence of alcohol, and his subsequent confession to murder made to PC Dowthwaite was also made under the influence, and as such his words were not completely reliable. Dr. Corbett was called to testify regarding the impact of the gas poisoning, which the doctor stated that William had been lightly poisoned, which suggests he hadn't been exposed to a high volume of gas, or had not inhaled it for a long period of time. He added that he believed the defendant was in good mental health, as he had asked for a glass of water in a clear and sober voice. It was alleged that the hammer, which had been ruled out as the murder weapon, had been used by William to secure the back door, using nails and a piece of string. It was speculated that the defendant got blood on the handle after he committed the crime. Unlike his previous trial, William took to the witness stand to testify. The 5'5" man with dark hair, hazel eyes, and a weathered complexion stood uncomfortably before the jury and offered his version of events. He stated that on the 2nd November he had spent the day with Ellen. They were drinking to celebrate a new job he had just acquired. Having consumed a large quantity of alcohol, William claimed he fell asleep on Ellen's sofa, but was woken up when he felt her hand in his trouser pocket. Believing she was trying to steal from him, he stood up and pushed her backwards onto the sofa. He reached for the table and raised the first thing he picked up and struck her with it a couple of times, before realising that he had grabbed his pocket knife. William proceeded to explain how he panicked. He placed his and Ellen's coats over her body, before heading into the kitchen to attempt to clean the blood off himself and the knife. The prosecutor, Donald Ross, cross-examined William's statement inquiring if the defendant had cut his hand when he reached blindly for an object on the table, and expressed surprise that he was able to grab the knife by the handle. Donald Ross moved on to ask what William had intended to do with the object he had picked up from the table, to which William responded that he wanted to frighten Ellen, but did not intend to strike her. The prosecutor replied, quote, "Do you seriously tell the jury that when you inflicted those wounds on Ellen's neck, you were merely trying to menace her and frighten her with the knife?" William confirmed that he only wished to scare Ellen. When questioned if he remembered stabbing her, he claimed he had no memory of it and did not realise that he had hurt her until he saw his blood. William went on to explain that he didn't go to get help because he knew Ellen was already dead. In closing, the defence argued that the jury of 4 women and 8 men take into account that William was under the influence of alcohol. He was not fully aware of his actions, and as such, they should consider the charge of manslaughter instead of murder. The defence's argument worked. When the jury returned, having deliberated for 2 hours, they found William Burkitt guilty of the manslaughter of Ellen Spencer. Before sentencing, William's prior convictions were read out to the court, and this included his time in prison for the manslaughter of Mary Tyler, whose death he had served 9 out of his 12-year sentence. So you would think that William Burkitt's sentence would reflect the fact that this was the second woman to die at his hands. But inexplicably, the judge ordered Burkitt to serve just 10 years, a decision which sparked debate regarding the leniency of the justice system. 48-year-old Emma Brooks lived on Neptune Street, which lay close to the docks and the large freight yard where the trains would come back and forth with cargo. For 18 months, she had been in a relationship with 51-year-old William Burkitt, who, having been released from prison, had returned to Hessel once more, and as before, he continued working on the trawlers, spending weeks at a time at sea away from Emma. But upon coming to shore, the couple had a loving relationship, and there had been no signs of discontent in the last year and a half. But something was troubling William, forcing him to confide in his sister Maria. He was concerned that while he was at sea, Emma was spending time with other men, and upon his return, he had discovered that she had taken a number of his belongings to the pawn shop. At 20 to 8 on the 1st of March 1939, William arrived at Maria's house. He had a fever, shaking uncontrollably. He was in an agitated state, and was clearly unwell. As his sister guided him to a seat, he told her he felt like he was going to die, then advised her he had consumed 600 aspirins. Concerned, Maria questioned her brother further, wanting to understand why he had taken the tablets. William told her that he had caught Emma with another man. With this revelation, William headed to leave the house, closely followed by Maria, who insisted he saw a doctor. As he headed off down the street, he replied, quote, "To tell you the truth, I have killed her." Stunned by her brother's confession, Maria hurried after him, but by the time she had reached the corner of the street, she just managed to see him disappear over the Liverpool Street Bridge, heading towards the docks. The dejected man then headed east towards Hull, clutching his stomach in pain as he stumbled along the riverside. He walked for nearly an hour before he took a seat on a pile of timber, which sat on the quayside of Victoria Dock. Shortly after this, his body was pulled from the water. 2 days earlier, Emma and William were last seen together at Emma's home on Neptune Street. A young girl had stopped by to visit, and as she left, William had locked the door almost as soon as she had stepped over the threshold. Not long after this, Mrs. Windsor, who lived next door, heard the couple arguing, and the sound of footsteps going up the stairs. William was then seen leaving the property. He approached the young girl who had visited the home earlier, and asked her to go and purchase some aspirin for him. She returned promptly and found William pacing the street, appearing restless. After this, no one saw or heard from William for over 24 hours, when he arrived at his sister's home on the 1st of March. As William's body was being pulled from the water, Emma's body was discovered by a police inspector who had received an anonymous tip that there may be a woman deceased at the address on Neptune Street. Inspector Davison forced his way through the front door, and after a search of the lower floor, he proceeded upstairs, where he found the body of Emma Brooks. On the 4th of March, while still recovering at the hospital, William Burkitt was arrested and charged with the murder of Emma. The trial began at Leeds Crown Court on the 17th of May 1939, and during proceedings the court heard a different side to the relationship between Emma and William. Prior to living on Neptune Street, the pair had taken up lodgings with a Mrs. Watkins and her niece. The former appeared as a witness, providing an account of an argument between Emma and William, in which he had grabbed hold of Emma's throat and attempted to strangle her, only stopping when Mrs. Watkins and her niece intervened. Testimony from Emma's sister-in-law, whose brother had been married to Emma for over 2 decades, was heard by the jury, in which she recalled William saying, quote, "Look at me, I am in rags. Before many more weeks she will be a dead woman. She played with your brother for 25 years, but she will not play with me. She will be a dead woman." Dr. MacLeod presented his autopsy findings to the court. He stated that the deceased had suffered a blow from a fist to the forehead shortly before her death, which had possibly been inflicted with enough force that it would likely have stunned her, which explained the lack of any signs she fought her attacker. Bruises on her neck and a broken hyoid bone suggested the cause of death was manual asphyxiation. When William took to the stand to testify, he painted a picture of the perfect relationship, which had changed around late December when he had learned that she had been pawning his items. He punished Emma for this by reducing her allowance. About the same time, he had found out that Emma had been spending time with 2 other men, and he went on to claim that it was this that had caused him to kill her. He described how, on the day she died, he had taken Emma shopping for a new purse, and they had been to the public house for a couple of drinks. He claimed that he had forgiven her for her indiscretions, and cared for her dearly. However, after they had finished their evening meal, the two headed to bed, and it was as they climbed the stairs that Emma mentioned the name of one of her lovers. William claimed he could not recall what happened after that. He just remembers coming to his senses to find his hands held tightly around Emma's neck, by which point it was too late. She was already dead. When the suggestion was made that he had strangled Emma while she was asleep, William vehemently denied the allegation, insisting she was awake. As with his previous trials, the jury concluded that William was guilty of manslaughter, but this time the judge took William's prior crimes into consideration and passed a sentence he deemed was appropriate. William Burkitt was sentenced to life imprisonment. William Burkitt attempted to appeal his conviction on the grounds that the judge should not have passed sentence based on his previous crimes, for which he had served his time. In his appeal he stated, quote, "For the past 10 years I have lived a living death, as much as that I have held over my head the most dreadful sentence that has ever been uttered by a sane judge." His appeal, however, failed, with the court decreeing that the sentence was neither unlawful nor unjust. The court concluded that Burkitt must remain in Dartmoor prison to serve his life sentence. While incarcerated, William Burkitt was said to be well liked by other prisoners, who bestowed upon him numerous nicknames, including, quote, "the King of the Serial Killer Club," "the Iron Man of Dartmoor," and "Fishy." Throughout his time in prison, he failed to show any remorse or regret for his actions, and more sickening was the fact that he had 3 gravestones tattooed on his arm, depicting the dates of each murder. At the age of 67, William was once again released from prison, but this time it was due to his health. He had been diagnosed with what reports at the time referred to as an incurable disease, and he was admitted to Hull Royal Infirmary. His compassionate release was only granted on the condition that he remained law-abiding. His ailing health didn't prevent him from attempting to escape. It was short-lived though, as within 4 hours he had been apprehended and returned to the hospital. As he had not committed any crime, he was not sent back to prison, spending the final 2 years of his life in hospital. William Burkitt passed away on the 24th of December 1956. It is hard to believe that William Burkitt was released from prison twice, enabling him to end the lives of 2 more women. The callousness of his actions, following the murder of Mary Tyler when he coldly advised her children that their mother was dead. When he murdered Ellen Spencer, he had taken the time to clean up the crime scene, despite claiming he was under the influence of alcohol. And it was speculated that he only decided to turn on the gas in the front bedroom when he heard Ellen's daughter at the door. Following the murder of Emma Brooks, he attempted to overdose on tablets. Was this out of remorse or desperation? After all, he failed to show any remorse for his actions at trial, nor during his imprisonment. Over 100 years later, the houses have long since been demolished and memories of William's crimes have faded. The names and stories of the 3 women whose lives he ended have been forgotten. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on today's case. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 32 of It's Murder Up North. Episode 33 will be available on Sunday. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.